Nice. When I put the one thing size, I don't know, 70 grams. But hi everyone, just wanted to welcome you to another table talk. I know all the footage there at the front was all NAVSEA MiG-35Bs, and this is a MiG-35B here sitting on the table. But that's not going to be the topic of this discussion. Mostly what I wanted to talk about was sort of like a change, I guess, in build philosophy that I've had probably, I guess, now for about the last year, primarily in different foams, motor choice and testing, as well as some servo experimentation. Now, I've already done a video on servos, which I'll link along with several other links down below. And if you've watched my videos, you've seen this plane several times testing some some quad racing motors, which I'll talk a little bit about. Most of what I wanted to talk about today is sort of a change in philosophy that I've had in the last year in building, selecting foams for building my planes. Now, one thing about foam, I know some of the foam that I'm going to talk about here today, depending on where you are in the world, you can't get it. Or if you could, it would be, the price would be exorbitant. But, maybe you have, in your local hobby store or online, you're available to get things that, that might work out equivalent. So mostly just want to share sort of some ideas, not trying to shove any, particular type of foam down anybody's throat. I know I've seen, in my time on the RC Powers forum, I've seen people fight nearly to the death on what's the best foam, the best glue, batteries, props, motors, etc., etc. So I'm not here to sort of do that. I think with anything in this hobby, including or maybe especially foam, it boils down to sort of, number one, what you can get, what you can afford, and just what works for you. My ideas, my philosophies here might not work for the way that you want your planes to look and fly. So I'm just going to kind of share my ideas and my sort of progression in playing around with some different build philosophies, and maybe it'll help you think outside the box from the way you've been building, or give you some ideas depending on what you have available. Now, I've built planes with several different foams in the same plane for quite a long time. This plane here actually represents, the way that I've built up until about a year ago, the way that I've built probably for about 2 or 3 years. Now, this plane is built with 3 different types of foam. It's primarily, probably 65–70% of it is Depron, 6mm Depron. The fuselage and canopy are made out of model plane foam, actually a product slightly different than model plane foam, which I'll talk a little bit more about here shortly. And the airfoils, KF4 airfoils, are made out of paperless Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready board. So I built dozens of planes this way, and they worked out really, really well, and super strong and durable, and just the way that I like to build for quite a long time. So I know that people have been building with Dollar Tree foam or Adams Ready board since long before I got in the hobby. The guys at Flight Test sort of built their empire on building with Dollar Tree foam. And here in North America, it's pretty easy to get and inexpensive. I can actually buy it at a store about a half-an-hour drive from me. I'm not going to go too overboard on what it cost me to build each of these combinations of planes I'm going to talk about. But for me here in Canada, I order my Depron and my, well, it's an equivalent of model plane foam. I order from a place called RC Foam in the States, so I have to pay shipping, duty, and taxes. Depron cost me about $98 per square foot, and I'm still hoarding about 5.5 sheets of the hobby grade Depron. It's been, I think, over 2 years ago since I last bought any Depron. So 98 cents a square foot. All these numbers are in US dollars. model plane foam. The stuff I use actually is called Fly Power Value XPS RC model foam, which is, a pretty long name. I think it's exactly the same as model plane foam grade B. Whether Adams makes it for them and they just rename it, repackage it, I'm not 100% sure, but it's the same size sheet. It's smooth on one side and kind of wavy and bumpy on the other side. Anyway, that cost me 45 cents a square foot, so less than half what Depron cost me. Dollar Tree foam cost me 24 cents a square foot, and again, I can get that at a local store, so I don't necessarily have to worry about whether the warehouse is out of stock. I don't have to worry so much about fluctuating exchange rates on the U.S. dollar, duty, taxes, all that sort of stuff, and it's pretty inexpensive. Now, I'd actually researched, maybe where you live, especially if you have a Hobbyking warehouse in your country, or one close enough that shipping's not going to cost too much. Now, I live in British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, and I think the USA warehouse, West warehouse, and I could be wrong. Last time I looked, it was in Oregon, so not that far away. Anyway, I looked into the 5mm Hobbyking foam board to experiment with, sort of maybe as an option for this Dollar Tree foam, because Dollar Tree foam with the paper left on is about 4.8, 5mm thick, depending on, it's not always that consistent. With the paper off, it's about 4.5mm thick. So the foam itself is very cheap. It's about $14, $15 US for 20 sheets of 20 by 30 inch, which is what Dollar Tree foam comes in, that size sheet. However, I just about fell out of my chair when I saw they wanted $48 in shipping, US and shipping, for a $14 box of foam. And then you tack on this end in Canada, I would have to pay duty and taxes. It was going to cost me about 84 cents a sheet. So unless somebody from Hobbyking is watching and wants to hook a brother up and have me build some planes out of that foam, and I'd gladly pay for the foam if you give me a better shipping rate. I'm not going to be experimenting with Hobbyking 5mm foam anytime soon. So anyway, how did this all get started? Well, about a year ago, when the NAVSEA SU-27 was released, one of the beta test pilots is a friend of mine, Peter, goes by Homie666 on the RC Powers forum, and he was one of our beta test pilots on the SU-27, and he built his entirely out of Dollar Tree foam, I was very, very impressed with how good it looked and how well it flew. So I decided, I'd been thinking in the back of my head, maybe I should try and build a plane entirely out of Dollar Tree foam. And seeing his plane kind of motivated me to finally get off my rear end and get outside of my box, my comfort zone, and build one out of Dollar Tree foam. So he was very, very helpful with some techniques. Anyway, if at the very start of the prelude there with all those high-speed passes, there's a plane there with green and tan camo on the top, black on the bottom. That's made entirely 100% of Dollar Tree foam. So one of the first things, and I actually flew that plane quite a bit with a quad racing motor as well. That was one of, when I first started to try and experiment with quad racing motors. And I'm certainly not, I have not led the charge to use quad racing motors in foamies or park jets, because lots of people have been using them in wings and park jets long before I decided to do it. But anyway, it's something that I'm currently got my teeth sunk into to experiment with, which is another change to my building philosophy. So anyway, when I saw how quick and efficient that plane was, even with a lightweight quad racing motor, it sort of lit a bit of a light bulb in my head. And I built several planes. If you've watched my table talk on the RC Powers F18 and F22 version 5, both those planes are built primarily with Dollar Tree foam. Now again, compared to this plane, and I posted some pictures, some comparison pictures between these two planes in a post on the RC Powers forum, and you can see it's not a huge difference, but you can see that there's a difference in the thickness of the nose profile and the leading edge of the wing, because I used a slightly thinner foam. So this nose is about 3 millimeters thinner then that nose all the way around, and the leading edge of the wing, including the KF airfoils, is about 1.5 millimeters thinner. And that doesn't seem like a lot, but you know, you got to remember it's not necessarily what your naked eye sees; it's what the air sees from a standpoint of drag reduction. Now, one thing I noticed with that plane was, because I made the nacelles out of paperless Dollar Tree foam, it was a bit flexible. Now, I'm not saying that it flexed like a banana when I went into a hard turn or anything like that, but it was a bit more flexible than I sort of liked my planes to be. So again, along the way, I've experimented a bit with the F18 and the F22, and then this MiG-35 here, which unfortunately is pardon me, is missing a motor right now, but I have one that's going into it very shortly. This one's built mostly with Dollar Tree foam, and then I used model plane foam for the vertical stabilizers and the nacelles. And this actually, it's a smaller plane, so not as much flex in it naturally. This is built at 90%, but it's a very, very strong plane. So that's worked out really, really well. I did need to put some reinforcement in the vertical stabilizers. So for this one, I decided to to unlock the vault on some of my hoarded hobby grade Depron, and I built this one. The nacelles and the elevons are built with Depron. And the other thing I did differently is, on this plane, I was still, because I did it on my all Dollar Tree foam plane, I put some reinforcement across the back here. And I came to realize that was probably overkill, because these side pieces down here and the vertical stabilizer, once you glue all that together, it really locks this in, makes this solid, so you're not really going to be, pardon me, too much flex back there, excuse me. So, I didn't put reinforcement in this one, because this is Dollar Tree foam back here with the paper left on. So one of the reasons that I did that, again, is what happens is, in addition, from that first plane, is what I realized, the paper, I leave the paper on behind the trailing edge of the KF, and the paper is removed forward here to, to reduce weight. And what happens is you end up then, because it's fairly stiff here with the paper on, fairly flexible with the paper off, is you end up sort of with a natural hinge point right about here, between this half and this half, where the plane is naturally flexible. So, I didn't think of that until I got flying around for a little bit. So that's one of the reasons now why I've experimented with using, Depron or model plane foam in the nacelles to give that sort of that lateral or longitudinal strength. Now, would I need to use Depron if I was building another MiG-35 of this size? Would I necessarily need to use Depron for the nacelles and the vertical stabilizers? Probably not. I could probably get away with using the model plane foam again. Again, a few extra, maybe a few extra grams by putting some reinforcement in the vertical stabilizers to keep them from flexing too much. I probably might still use some Depron for my elevons. Just to keep those nice and strong with model plane foam. I don't need to use it with the Depron. Now, if you were building a plane with, a big NTM 3000 motor on 4-cell, you might need a reinforcement even if it's Depron. But with the power plants that I'm using, you don't necessarily need to do that. So, looking at, again, going back to talking a little bit about these quad racing motors, and again, you've probably watched, I've field tested, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them now. So this is your workhorse. This is a knockoff. This is your workhorse 2212, 2200 kV motor. Kind of the workhorse of park jets. Probably the most popular park jet motor around. And this is probably the lightest of all the quad racing motors that I've tested. This is a Brother Hobby Returner R2 2205 2800 kV motor. Now it's physically the stator is less than physically half the size of this one. Now, because this is a fairly high kV motor, it makes up for some of that lack of size with kV. Very, very powerful. It's actually more powerful at top end than this motor is. The beauty of it is this one is actually 27 grams, with the prop and everything on. You compare these two, this one's 27 grams, essentially an ounce lighter than this one. So that makes a big difference. Now, some of these I've tested are pretty torquey naturally because they're a little bit bigger. But when I first started playing with the all Dollar Tree foam plane, I was using another quad racing motor, actually not quite as powerful as this one, but it's same size stator at 2205. And what I would notice is that sometimes if I get flying in the wind, was that the motor just didn't quite have the torque. So that has led me now to to select my quad racing motors a little more differently. If I'm going to go a 2205 size, I find going to a higher kV seems to work out better, and just for the extra power. So by using, by sort of flip-flopping my selection of foams in how I construct my planes, I've significantly reduced my drag. Now I have had to modify, when I'm using Dollar Tree foam here with the paper left on the back, I have had to modify my build techniques on all my planes since I built the first all Dollar Tree foam plane. I've moved the motor forward by at least an inch to help keep things, still keep things fairly concentrated around the center of gravity. Because if not, I ended up on the all Dollar Tree foam battery or plane. I ended up with my battery pretty far forward. Now it didn't, make it feel like it was flying nose heavy or sluggish in the pitch, but since I've started moving the motor forward and I'm able to keep things tighter, it just makes the plane feel even quicker, more agile, and more efficient. So like I touched on as well, when I used to build these planes with this combination of foam, traditionally I always used to use 9-gram nylon gear servos all the way around. And of course, most of my motors were, 67, anywhere between 60 and 67 grams. So by switching to these quad racing motors, I'm saving myself anywhere from 17 to 27 ounces in the motor. Normally I have to use the same size speed controller. And then also by, what did I say? Oh, I didn't say the weight here. Most of those planes that I used to build were almost bang on, MiG-35, all the planes sort of this size. I was always bang on sort of 21.5 ounces. Well, now by building these planes with these lighter quad racing motors and using the 5-gram servos on my ailerons and my rudders, I'm coming in at about 20 ounces. So I know, an ounce and a half, when you're talking about planes in the range of 20 to 22 ounces, an ounce and a half savings with still having the same, if not more, speed and power, makes for a pretty fun combination to fly. Now, most of these park jet motors, or most of these quad racing motors, are not anywhere near as efficient. I haven't had one yet that's efficient as this motor, so if you like to fly with smaller batteries and or have better endurance, then maybe the quad racing motor choice might not be for you. But if you're really looking to lighten up your plane, and again, power to weight ratio just on the motor on this little beast is pretty amazing. But anyway, I won't go on and on too much more about quad racing motors, but I've had a lot of fun with them. So yeah, so there's kind of what I've sort of been experimenting with for the last year, sort of all culminated here into one video. I've talked about it off and on in other videos, but like I said, I know that in a lot of parts of the world you may not be able to get these foams, some of these foams that I've talked about, but maybe you have alternatives that you can experiment with. If you can, most 99.9% of park jet plans are based on building with 6mm foam, and it doesn't take a whole lot to adapt them. If you're going to use a thinner foam, 4.5mm to 5mm, it takes a little bit of practice maybe with the first one or two, but reducing, if you can do things to reduce your drag profile by 10 or 15%, even if you don't save any weight, I can tell you from experience it makes a huge amount of difference. And because I've changed the other part of my philosophy in using lighter servos and lighter equally or more powerful quad racing motors. You know, my planes compared to say a year ago, the performance of my planes has really taken a step up. So anyway, just thought I would share all that with you, sort of, you know, as we're now getting into a new year, and this is, you know, kind of the way that I'm going forward. I'm still waiting on a few more quad racing motors to come in the mail that I'm pretty excited to test. Some of them I think are going to be pretty peppy, and eventually I'll do, you know, a wrap-up video discussion on all of those when I get all those tested. So just before I wrap up, kind of I've already written a blog post on it, which again will be linked down below. Plans for the NAVSEA planes, you know, which this is one of, the MiG-35B, will no longer be available on the NAVSEA or MigsRUs.com website. That website is actually being moved to another provider right now, so it's not available. Hopefully everything will transfer over, and then all of the blog posts and other information that was written there will be available once again, but the plans will no longer be sold there. So, pardon me, thank you to the gracious support of BMO, Ian, and Jeff from Park Flyers International. The plans for all the planes, the NAVSEA planes, are now available on their website. The original MiG-35A, 35, or it's been called the MiG-35A, and the MiG-FA, which is a kind of a concept stealth plane based on the T-50. Those will be free because they were free on our website. The plans for the MiG-35B and the Su-27 will be by donation to help the A2R kids and their families and other underprivileged people in Jakarta, Indonesia. It's a project that BMO and the guys from Park Flyers International got going at from their inception, and I think it's just a wonderful way to pay it forward, you know, from this hobby. So I would encourage you, please go check out their website. BMO is just pushing the limits on pushing the bar higher and higher with every one of his designs on scale-looking planes. He has some amazing designs there as well. And again, if you're interested in the MiG-35B or the Su-27 and you want to you know, make a bit of a donation to a very worthwhile cause, please go check it out. And again, my sincerest, most humble thanks to the guys from Park Flyers International for allowing the NAVSEA plans to continue to be kept alive on your website. So there we go. I hope you know, this is you know, giving you something to think about, or maybe some new ideas on how you might change your build philosophy a little bit to maximize your plane's performance, depending on what you're looking for out of your park jets. Thanks very much for watching. I don't think I'll be writing a supporting blog post on this, but again, there'll be lots of links down below in the comments. And if you have any questions, please send me, post a comment on the channel. And also for those people who are interested in more information about NAVSEA planes, and you know, if they need support on those, I'll have my email address in the comments below that you can send me an email to ask questions about the NAVSEA planes. So thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone, and park jet noise, the other sound of freedom. Take care, everyone.